The text's multi-level, pleasingly elliptical form is an integral part of its character. If Ian had wanted to be more specific here, he would have done so in the original. Time and place are purposefully left imprecise in the story, which is essentially timeless and placeless. One might presume that the 1930s are nearly over, and as Nabokov later confirmed, see author's note 1, that we are in Paris and then en route to the south of France. There is also a brief detour to a small city not very far from the capital, the only character mentioned by name in the text. For a name Nabokov subsequently attributed to the protagonist, see author's note 1 and p. 83 to 1824. Is the least important one, the female servant in that provincial city who helps the ill-fated child pack and choose away the chicks as the car containing protagonist and prey united at last speeds away. I shall leave to the studious, among whom exist some superbly sensitive readers of Nabokov, the detailed identification and the documentation of themes and levels, straight narrative, tricky metaphor, romantic poetry, sexuality, fairy tale, sublimation, mathematics, concise, conscience, compassion, fear of being strung up by the heels, as well as the search for hidden parallels with the Song of Igor's Campaign or Moby Dick. Father would have put Freudians on guard against rejoicing at the ephemeral mention of a sister, the girl's curious regression into infancy at the end, or the elaborate walking stick, which is unabashedly and entertainingly phallic, but on the totally distinct plane, visually evocative as well as the appetizing valuable objects. Another example is the rare blank-faced watch, with which Nabokov sometimes liked to endow his characters. Certain other compressed images and locutions should possibly be explained, since it would be a pity if they were wasted. Here are a few special examples given unlike those singled out above in proper order. The black salad devouring a green rabbit, page 7, 1, 2. One of the number, see below, of visual aberrations that on one level give the story a surreal enchanted aura, while on the other describing with utmost economy and directness how a character's perception of reality is momentarily distorted by a state of being. In this case, the protagonist's overpowering, thwarted, barely concealed excitement. The Little Japanese Steps, page 9, 1, 2. Many, if not all, readers must have seen on the big screen or at the little one, or at the operas, or perhaps in the real Orient, the geisha-style walk, short mincing steps on high platforms, sandals, to which Nabokov likens the girl's progress on skates, whose wheels refuse to roll on the gravel. A potentially more cryptic passage is that of the strange nailless finger scrawled on the fence, page 24, 1:15. Here again, deliberate ambiguity, concurrent images and ideas, and multiple levels of interpretation are at play. To spell this one out, the definite goal that emerges from a substratum of the man's brain is to access the girl via marriage to the mother. The imagined graffito on the fence is a hybrid of the forefinger pointing the way on old-fashioned signs, and of some joker's phallic doodle on that digit stylized, nailless shape simultaneously suggests to a mind bent basically on depravity, but not devoid of self-reproaching flashes of objectivity. This ambiguous finger simultaneously indicates, in the fleeting image, the path of courtship of the mother, the secret parts of the yearned-for girl, and the protagonist's own vulgarity that no amount of rationalization can explain away. Cuff, page 26, 122, 1. As in cufflinks, it is clearly implied that the poor woman is still playing hard to get. The word play, with an oblique echo of the work's Russian title, whose most direct meaning is magician, refers to a card up the conjurer's sleeve. The superficial trappings of marriage, plus the actual live, presumably loving husband, the live ace of hearts. There is also a parallel introspective nuance here, the cynical trick that this travesty of a marriage represents to the protagonist. Here he shares this underlying joke with the perceptive reader, though not, of course, with his bride-to-be. We have the same kind of multiple compression here as in the graffito image. Compass rose, page 32, 7. The early Italian nautical compass card, more stylized in today's and indicating, as compass roses still do, the principal and subsidiary compass points, which also identified the direction from which the winds blew, was called Rosa di Venti, Rose of the Winds, because its flower-like appearance and because of wind directions. were of paramount concern to navigators, the Italian term survives to this day. A nice fillip is gained in translation for a minority of readers, perhaps, those who navigate and those who know Italian, since the image refers to drafts coming from various directions through windows opened by the charwoman. The 32nd, page 32-8. Another beautifully concentrated image that is almost a pity to deaden by bookish explication. His violent emotions, anticipation of finally encountering the girl alone, the infuriating surprise and disappointment of finding the bustling char, have simply imparted a moist blur to his vision and made him see an absurd date. The month is immaterial. A Nabokovian irony is there, but a bit of compassion for the monster seeps through as well. A doubling cat, page 63, 2. This is a cat seen by a child so tired that she has difficulty keeping her eyes focused. It is optically akin to the 32nd and the green rabbit. It would of course have been possible to give a minute explanation of every challenging passage, but that would have produced a scholarly apparatus longer than the text itself. These little puzzles, which without exception have an artistic purpose, should also be fun. The approximate reader, drowsy from the airliner's unhealthy air and the complimentary drinks he has downed, always has the lamentable option of skipping, as he often did with the best-selling Lolita. The things I love about the story are, among others, the suspense, how will reality betray the dream, and the corollary surprise on every page, the eerie humor, the grotesque wedding night, the suspicious chauffeur who vaguely foreshadows Claire Quilty, the Shakespearean clown of a night porter, the protagonist's desperate search for the misplaced room. Will he emerge, as in A Visit to the Museum, into a totally different town, or will the old porter, whom he comes upon at last, react as if seeing him for the first time in his life? The descriptions of forest hopping from hill to hill only to trip over the highway, and much else, the preliminary glimpses of people and things with a parallel life of their own that will incidentally or crucially recur, the trucks ominously thundering in the night, the splendidly innovative use of Russian in the original, the cinematic imagery of the surreal conclusion and the frenzied pace, a kind of stretta finale that accelerates toward the crashing climax. The English title chosen by Father has, of course, not so secret echo in the Enchanted Hunters of Lolita. I shall leave to others to search for additional Easter eggs of this kind. One should be wary, however, of exaggerating the significance of superficial similarities. Nabokov considered The Enchanter a totally distinct work, only distantly connected to Lolita. It may have contained, as he put it, the first little throb of the later novel, and even that thesis might be questioned if one attentively examines certain earlier works of his, but we must also not forget the arts in general pulsate with first throbs and foreshadow future larger works. Various library compositions come to mind, such as Joyce's Portrait of an Artist, or conversely, there may be a subsequent mini version, a final distillation such as Massenet's Portrait of a Manon. In any case, Bolshevik is certainly not a portrait of Lolita. The differences between the two are clearly greater than the similarities, whether or not the later novel is a love affair between the author and the English language, a love affair between Europe and America, a jaundiced view of the motel scene and the surrounding landscape, a modern-day free translation of Onegin. There and multitude of other hypotheses have been advanced eagerly but with varying degrees of seriousness and credibility. Lolita is unquestionably the product of a very new and different artistic stimuli, on the premise that it has preferable to be angelic than foolish in appropriating the genesis of complete artistic works. I shall not venture to assess the importance of Lolita on Nabokov's study of Lewis Carroll, of his observations in Palo Alto in 1941, of Havelock Ellis's transcription circa 1912, the Ukrainian pedophile's obsession, which have been translated from the original French by Donald Rayfield, who, despite a haunting echo of the fictional John Ray Jr., Ph.D. in Lolita, is a very real British scholar. Rayfield theorizes, amid certain less convincing assertions, that the pseudonymous Victor, via Ellis, deserves credit for his contribution to the theme and plot of Lolita and the strange, sensuous, and intellectual character of Humbert Humbert, the hero of Nabokov's first finest English language novel, and while acknowledging the previous composition of the Enchanter, whose title he translates literally as the magician, he further conjectures that the unfortunate Ukrainian's account provided the final impetus for the emergence of Lolita's central theme. I am indebted for certain details and citations to Edwin MacDonald's report in the New York Times of 15 March 1985 regarding the publication by Grove Press of the composition of Victor X. This hypothesis might merit consideration were it not for certain chronological facts that I must nevertheless point out. It was not until 1948 that Edmund Wilson sent the Ellis transcription to Nabokov, who had had no previous acquaintance with it, while Volshevnik, which does contain what might be called the central theme, if little else, of Lolita, was completed in 1939. As far as the Enchanter's contribution, occasional ideas and images from it are indeed echoed in Lolita. But as I, and as many others, have noted in the past, themes and details of various kinds often recur in Nabokov's novels, stories, poems, and plays. In this case, the echoes are distant and the dissimilarity substantial. Setting, geographically, but above all artistically remote, characters reflected on occasion but dimly at best, development and denouement totally different. Perhaps a girl in a European park, fleetingly recalled by Humbert on an early page of Lolita, is Nabokov's way of acknowledging the little heroine of the Enchanter, but also of relegating her forever to the category of very distant relative. Dolores Hayes may, as Nabokov says, be very much the same lass as the Enchanter's victim, but only in an inspirational conceptual sense. In other ways, the earlier child is very different, perverse only in the madman's eyes, innocently incapable of anything like the quilty intrigue, sexually unawakened and physically immature, which is perhaps why Weedle recalled her as a 10-year-old. It would be a serious mistake to roll away on that proto-nymphet skates into a garden of parallel primrose paths. About the author. Vladimir Nabokov was born in St. Petersburg on April 23, 1989. His family fled to Germany in 1919 during the Bolshevik Revolution. Nabokov studied French and Russian literature at Trinity College, Cambridge, from 1919 to 1923, then lived in Berlin 1923 to 1937 and Paris 1937 to 1940, where he began writing mainly in Russian under the pseudonym Sirin. In 1940, he moved to the United States, where he pursued a brilliant literary career as a poet, novelist, critic, and translator, while teaching literature at Stanford, Wellesley, Cornell, and Harvard. The monumental success of his novel Lolita, 1955, enabled him to give up teaching and devote himself fully to his writing. In 1961, he moved to Montreux, Switzerland, where he died in 1977. Recognized as one of the century's master prose stylists in both Russian and English, he translated a number of his original English works, including Lolita, into Russian, and collaborated on English translations of his original Russian works. About the translator. Dimitri Nabokov was born in 1934 in Berlin and came to the United States as a small child with his parents. He graduated from Harvard, served in the U.S. Army, and then began vocal studies that led him to become an opera and concert performer, a basso, around the world. He has translated most of his father's Russian short stories and plays, and many of his novels, into English. Thank you for listening to The Enchanter by Vladimir Nabokov. Let me know what your thoughts were. I do feel like there are a lot of recurring themes, but one that I find really interesting is really, it's the thing about the mother's reluctance in places, and also some of the things she says are just so very telling of what she's really. It's like she knows something's up, she knows something's definitely wrong, but so that's kind of like a huge difference, I feel like, between her and Charlotte. She definitely senses something. and she's a lot more rational. It's like she seems like a real person. Charlotte Hayes doesn't feel. It's weird to say feel about a character, but it's like Charlotte in places is so theatrical that she almost doesn't feel real. If that makes any sense. Until he marries her. And that's the interesting thing about it. Like, once Humbert marries Charlotte Hayes, you get to see more of this. Okay, now she's allowing herself to kind of not wear as much makeup. And just little hints here and there that she's sort of like, she's not trying as hard as she was in the beginning. And that has softened her down into a more realistic person than she at first presented herself to him. And I feel like they're like both Humbert and the Enchanter are equally as bad. But I feel like Humbert is less. He's either more self-deceptive about it, like he will sometimes jokingly sort of like say he's a monster and all of that, refer to having claws, but at the same time there's this sort of thing where it's like he can't allow himself to see past these projected images onto this girl who probably doesn't resemble his original love as much as he wants her to, but he wants her to so badly that he will convince himself that everything she does is so like the girl that he used to love. And every time that it reveals something where it's like, oh, that's not like her, that's not like the girl that he was in love with, he gets so upset by it, as though he's been cheated. And so like there's a really big difference, especially if you read Lolita in a different person. And by that I mean if you actually read Lolita as while you're reading it, switch it from everything Humbert says to he said, and Lolita to like anything she says to first person, anything that has any sort of attribute to her specifically in the first person, it totally changes the book. Anyway, thank you for listening. I don't know what else to say.